Yegro. A door slams shut. Camille's office. Robert Sims standing on the wrong side of it, frozen, staring at a piece of wood like it just betrayed him. 106. Jules, unconscious, being dragged through the dark by a man we thought was dead. 014. And then Camille's voice, cold and final. I'll do it myself. Freeze frame on that line for a second, because it's the whole episode in 9 words. Is Camille actually about to let Jules die to save 10,000 people? And if she does that make her the hero of this story, or the villain? That's the question we are answering today, piece by piece, frame by frame. Let's rewind for a second and remember exactly where we left things. Because this episode does not make sense without the setup, Jules has been off her memory suppression medication for weeks now, and she's paying for it. She's chasing ghosts. She's chasing Lucas Kyle, a man everyone else in this silo believes died in the mines nearly 3 months ago. Camille, meanwhile, has quietly become the single most powerful person inside these walls. She's the one holding the vitamin D plus plan in her hands. A slow, silent, almost invisible way to wipe the memories of every single person in Silo 18. No violence. No bodies in the street. Just forgetting. Last season ended in sacrifice, remember that. It ended with people giving up everything for a future they'd never see. This season is asking a much darker question. What does that sacrifice actually cost the people forced to make the call? And by episode 3, that cost finally has a face. It has a name. And that name is Jules. We also can't forget where Robert Sims stands in all of this. For 2 seasons, he's been the enforcer, the cold hand of the algorithm, a man who followed orders without blinking. But something cracked in him this episode, and I think it cracked the moment he watched Jules fail to remember her own father sacrificing his life for her. That single realization is going to ripple through everything that happens next, and we're going to talk about exactly why. Now let's break this episode down moment by moment, because there is so much buried in here that a casual watch will completely miss. At 1:19, we watch Jules walking the silo completely alone, venturing lower and lower into levels she has no real authority to be in, refusing to trust a single soul, including Shirley, whose message she flat out ignores without a second thought. Watch her face here? There's no hesitation in it, no guilt. This is a woman who has fully decided the only person she can rely on is herself. That's a gut punch if you think about it, because total isolation is exactly what the algorithm wanted for her from the beginning. It's just not happening in the way anyone up top expected. She's not being isolated by force. She's isolating herself willingly, and that makes her almost impossible to predict. At 1:44, Martha makes an observation that I think is doing a lot more work than it appears to on the surface. She says Jules trusts her gut, and that this is something completely different from every character we saw in the previous episode. On the surface, that's a compliment. But sit with it for a second. Trusting your gut in a place built entirely on lies, surveillance, and manufactured memories is either the bravest thing you can do or the most dangerous. I think the show is deliberately leaving that ambiguous. At 1:57, Shirley's selfish streak comes out again, and honestly, I want to talk about this because I think it's a deliberate writing choice, not an accident. She blames Jules for not remembering her, when Jules has absolutely no control over that. It's frustrating to watch, and I think it's meant to be. I believe Shirley is being positioned as the emotional foil to Jules this season, the person who reacts to trauma with blame, while Jules reacts to trauma with obsession and forward motion. At 2:16, we get confirmation Jules is still skipping her medication entirely. And here's the misdirection the episode plays on us. She thinks she has the upper hand. She has no idea Dr. Amy already knows. She has no idea the CCTV inside her own apartment has been quietly recording her every move this entire time. But at 2:30, something shifts. And I think this is one of the most important beats in the whole episode. Jules clocks someone following her, even when she believed she was completely alone. I believe this is the exact moment she realizes she's being watched. And if that's true, every single scene we see her in at home from this point forward is going to feel different. More guarded, more performative, almost like she's acting for an audience she now knows is there. At 2:43, Jules starts navigating her thought process, almost like she's solving a puzzle, piece by piece, talking to Robert Sims about Lucas Kyle, then Shirley, then Knox, going deeper and deeper into the silo with every conversation. This isn't random wandering. This is investigation. And it tells me Jules isn't just grieving anymore. She's building a case. At 3:04, we get the reveal that if Jules can't reach the Digger Void, she's fully prepared to go all the way down to the mines herself, the exact place Lucas Kyle was sent after the Red Level Relic incident, before he was made Bernard's shadow. It's described as a place people go essentially to die, a place where, if you truly want to disappear, you go. That detail matters more than it sounds. At 3:20, the tension escalates hard. Camille catches wind that Jules is hunting for Kyle down in the mines, and Kyle has now been missing, presumed dead by everyone in power, for 93 days straight. I think that number is deliberate. 93 days is long enough for people to stop looking, long enough for a man to become a ghost story instead of a person. And I think that's exactly why Kyle chose the mines in the first place. It's the one place nobody with real authority is still searching. At 3:36, we get a flashback beat confirming Kyle was warned by the algorithm itself to never speak a word about what he saw down there. The tunnel, the remnants of the world before. That's why he said nothing to Sims back in the Season 2 finale. And I believe it's why he's been digging horizontally ever since, possibly trying to recreate that same tunnel and reach another silo entirely. At 4:31, we hit what I think might be the true emotional core of the entire episode, Camille and Robert Sims. Their dynamic has completely flipped this season. She's the one holding real power now, and he genuinely does not know how to handle it. Watch his face carefully when he talks about wanting to make real, lasting memories with their son. That's not a throwaway domestic line. That's Robert Sims processing grief in real time, immediately after watching Jules fail to remember her own father's sacrifice. He does not want that same emptiness waiting for his own child. At 5:05, the bombshell finally drops. The algorithm is actively persuading Camille to release vitamin D+ into the water supply of Silo 18. Slow, quiet, untraceable. No riots, no bodies. Just a population that slowly forgets who Juliette Lewis even was. And with her, any hope of ever going outside. It's a reset button. Day 1 all over again for 10,000 people who won't even know they've been reset. At 5:30, Camille hesitates, and I think this is crucial. She is genuinely afraid of losing her own individuality, her identity, her memories of her own family. She does not want to become an empty shell like Jules has become, but by 6:19 she caves anyway and tells Robert everything. Her exact words are devastating. They promise to do anything to keep their son alive, even forget him completely. At 6:49, we cut to Daniel and Helen watching Steve play a game of chess, and I don't for a second think that's a coincidence. Every move on that board gets deliberate camera focus, mirroring the impossible decisions Camille is being forced to make in real time. And here's where my theory gets bigger. What if the 51 silos were never actually built purely for human survival? What if we're watching a decades-long 352-year game, one that only ends when a single silo outlasts every other one? That would explain why silos are never ever allowed to contact each other. Contact would ruin the experiment entirely, and then the ending. At 7:47, Jules is dragged out unconscious after inhaling gas underground, saved, almost too conveniently, by Lucas Kyle himself. At 8:10, Camille says the line that closes the episode, "I'll do it myself." She has the opportunity to turn Jules into a martyr, a hero who sacrificed herself for the silo. All Camille has to do is make absolutely sure. Jules never wakes back up. Now, let's dig deeper into why I believe Camille is not actually going to go through with this. Let me give you the darkest version of this theory first, because I think you deserve the scary read before the hopeful one. I believe the writers are deliberately building toward a moment where Camille crosses a line she can never uncross. And I believe Robert Sims is the one who ultimately stops her. Not purely out of loyalty to Jules, but because he no longer recognizes the woman his wife has become. Here's my evidence. 3 separate pieces pulled straight from this episode. First, the mood chart Camille was shown, which proves that Jules' sudden death or disappearance would devastate morale across the entire silo, meaning killing her quietly is not actually the clean, contained solution it looks like on paper. Second, Robert's near-obsessive focus on memory throughout this entire episode. That tells me the second vitamin D+ is actually deployed, he will not be able to stay silent about it, no matter what it costs him. Third, that door closing directly on Robert's face outside Camille's office. That is not just a visual flourish. That is the show telling us explicitly that he is being shut out of the exact decisions that are going to define who his wife becomes going forward. Of course, I want to be fair here, because I always try to give you the balanced take. There is a real alternate theory worth considering. Maybe Camille does go through with it. Maybe this entire season is actually about watching a fundamentally good person become the villain, slowly, one impossible choice at a time, until there's no line left for her to cross. If that theory is the correct one, then episode 3 isn't really a cliffhanger at all. It's the quiet beginning of Camille's fall. And we just watched it happen, without even realizing it. So here's why this episode matters so much more than it might seem on first. Watch every single storyline running through this week. Jules refusing to give up. Camille fighting her own conscience. Daniel and Helen chasing a buried recording. Even Paul Billings hunting for what happened to Ola Kent. Every one of them is circling the exact same devastating question. What are we willing to forget in order to survive? Jules is fighting with everything she has left to remember. Camille is fighting just as hard to forget on purpose. And somewhere underneath all of it, Lucas. Kyle already knows a truth that could bring the entire silo crashing down if it ever gets out. We are one single decision away from finding out exactly who Camille really is underneath all of it. So what do you think? Is Camille actually going to let Jules die to protect 10,000 people? Or is Robert Sims about to stop her before it's too late? Drop your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. Before we get into this next part, I want to slow down and look at some things a lot of people are going to scroll straight past, because episode 3 is packed with details that don't get resolved in the moment, but I think are going to matter a lot more later in the season. At 9/11, Daniel Keane and Helen Drew are working together for the first time with a shared goal, figuring out what actually happened when Charlotte and her colleagues flew through that cloud on the Iran mission. Everyone on that flight died except Charlotte. Everyone. And I don't think that's a coincidence the show is glossing over. I think it's a setup. At 9:23, Daniel visits one of the pilot's memorials, Juan's memorial, and this is where he learns something huge. The comms weren't just damaged in the crash. They were downgraded on purpose, specifically so they couldn't be intercepted by jamming. Sit with that for a second. Someone, somewhere, wanted that communication to be untouchable. That's not an accident. That's protection. And protection like that only happens when someone in power is trying to keep control of the narrative before it even happens. At 9:33, we get the real gut punch of this storyline. The crash itself was actually recorded. That single detail is what the entire Daniel and Helen arc this episode is built around. At 9:41, they track down Steve, a man with access to parts of the internet almost nobody else can reach, and he manages to make an analog recording of that crash footage. I think the importance of this recording goes far beyond just evidence. I believe the sound of it, the actual sound, could be the exact thing that breaks through Charlotte's memory suppression. We already know objects from the past can trigger buried memories. Remember Jules and the helmet from Silo 17? I think this recording is Charlotte's helmet. At 10:05, we get confirmation Charlotte is being actively medicated, and I don't think that's random either. I think the government does not want her remembering what she actually saw up there, which raises the real question underneath all of this. Was that massive cloud a weapon the United States was housing? And if that information ever got out, could it compromise not just the mission that already happened, but whatever move is coming next? Personally, I think it could do a lot more than that. I think it could incriminate the entire United States government. At 10:26, we get our first real look at the captain of the Nimitz, and I want you to pay close attention to this character going forward, because I think he's about to become one of the most dangerous people in the show. We first saw him watching Helen and Charlotte back in episode 2, and in this episode, he is everywhere. He's at Juan's memorial at 10:41, speaking with his father, but never once taking his eyes off Daniel Keane. He's at Helen's place of work at 10:49, which, by the way, is very clearly not the actual Washington Post. And I think that detail is intentional. Another quiet reminder that nothing in this world is what it claims to be. And I believe it's this same captain who broke into Steve's den and stole the recording of the crash. Why does this matter so much? Because he's not just protecting information, he's protecting silence. He doesn't want the truth to come out into the physical world. And he doesn't want it to come back inside Charlotte's mind either. He's attacking the truth from both directions at once, the evidence outside and the memory inside. That's not damage control. That's an erasure campaign. And I don't think that tape is actually destroyed. I think it survives, and I think it resurfaces later this season, or possibly early next season, in the exact moment Charlotte finally remembers everything. Now, let's talk about Paul Billings, because I think his storyline is being massively underestimated right now. At 11:46, Sheriff Paul Billings is on a full manhunt for Ola Kent after her sister reports her missing. Something felt off to me last episode about her boyfriend not reporting her missing himself, and episode 3 finally explains why. At 11:53, we learn her new boyfriend was previously involved with Ed Harwood's daughter, the same daughter who was shadow to the head of supply, the exact position Ola currently holds. At 12:03, we're reminded that Ed and Ola already had visible tension back in episode 1, and honestly, I didn't expect that conflict to boil over this early in the season. At 12:11, a body is discovered in the mines, someone who was clearly caught by the gas, and it's confirmed to be Ola. At 12:18, there's a sheet placed over her face, which visually reads as a death confirmation. But here's the thing. It's never actually confirmed on screen. It could just as easily be there to stop her from inhaling more of the fumes. I think the show is deliberately keeping that ambiguous, and I think that ambiguity is the whole point. If Ola really is dead, I believe this connects directly back to Ed Harwood and his daughter. My theory is that the boyfriend knew exactly where Ola was going because she'd told him she was investigating the disappearance of items. Supply records, most likely. I think he passed that information along to Ed or his daughter, and I think they intercepted her, planning to remove her from the equation so the daughter could reclaim her old position as shadow. I don't think they planned for her to die. I don't think anyone knew the gas was coming that day, but the scratch found on her body tells me there was some kind of physical conflict before she ever reached the mines. I expect Billings is about to open a full murder investigation, and I think that investigation is what finally exposes what Ed and his daughter were actually planning. One more detail I want to point out before we move on. At 8:35, notice how differently Camille reacts to Robert's talk of memories compared to how she would have reacted back in season 1. The show is practically daring us to notice the shift. A version of Camille from a season ago would have grabbed onto that idea instantly. This Camille barely reacts at all. That single moment tells you everything about how far she's already drifted, even before the vitamin D plus decision is fully made. Now here's a smaller theory I want to leave you with, because I think it's going to matter a lot more than it seems right now at 14:35. When Steve clones Daniel's identification badge, I don't think that scene is just there for plot convenience. I think it's another quiet hint toward the theory that the algorithm running these silos might actually be built on a copy of Daniel Keane himself. Think about the tone of the algorithm's decisions this season. Calculated, protective, almost paternal in a cold way. It genuinely does sound like him. If that theory is true, then every choice the algorithm makes for Camille, for Jules, for the entire silo, might actually be Daniel Keane's own instincts, just running on a loop, centuries after the man himself is gone. That's a much bigger, much scarier idea than an AI is controlling the silos. That's a person's mind, trapped, still making decisions long after he should have had any say at all. So here's where that leaves us heading into episode 4. Charlotte is one recording away from remembering everything. Paul Billings is one investigation away from exposing the Harwoods. And if my theory about the algorithm is right, then the entire silo system might be run by a version of a man who's been dead for hundreds of years, still trying to protect people the only way he knows how. Let me know down in the comments which theory you think is actually true.